As a result, Australia is also at war.
It is feared that the Prime Minister has drowned.
He has misled the Parliament.
Welcome to the Political History of Australia podcast.
Any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up the day is a bum.
I will not be lectured by this man.
Why won't you call an early election?
Mate, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do you slowly.
With your host, John Ruddick.
Welcome to this brand new podcast series. Thank you for joining. This is a narrative series that covers the politics and the geopolitics of Australia from the pre-Captain Cook era up to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. That's assuming he's still in the top job by the time we reach the present day. The aim is to release one episode a week, so I suspect we'll end up at around 100. In the timeline, this episode is not episode 1. It is, however, a barely known but colourful chapter in Australian political history, so I thought I'd release it before the beginning as a sample of what's to come. And it's not about hard politics, but it is a fascinating window into colonial Australia in the 1870s and introduces us to our first Prime Minister and how he became a public figure overnight. So let's get underway with the introductory sample episode, A Day at the Cricket with Edmund Barton. On 8 February 1879, at what's now known as the Sydney Cricket Ground, the goddess of good luck smiled down on a 30-year-old unknown barrister. He was gifted with the intellect and the demeanour of a leader, but he was also lazy and drank a little too much. On this day, he was the umpire of a cricket match between New South Wales and England. He would parlay his cameo on this wild day and just over 2 decades later etch his name in history as Australia's first Prime Minister. His name was Edmund Barton. Australia has warm summers and plenty of flat open space. So soon after the first fleet's arrival in 1788, cricket was being played. Intercolonial cricket matches began in the 1850s, generating huge public interest and passion. Cricket is the world's second most watched sport, but in no country is mankind's finest game more woven into the national fabric than Australia. Cricket unites Australians from the boardrooms to the bricklayers, from Burnie to Brisbane and Broome, and from the 18th to the 21st century. In the 1800s, there was no TV or radio, so if you wanted to watch a match, you had to be there. Finely dressed governors, politicians, stockbrokers, merchants and landowners watched in the grandstand, what's today known as the member stand, but they were always well outnumbered by the plebs, under the summer sun, drinking booze, placing bets, and, from time to time, as we'll see, getting rowdy. Colonial interest in cricket ratcheted up when the first English team toured in 1861. On field, the players itched to defeat the mother country, to demonstrate that the land, once of wretched convicts, was now the land of the physically strong who could beat even England at the gentleman's game. But off the field, the colonial establishment endlessly fussed and fawned over their English visitors, eagerly wanting to showcase the success and the civility of their young society. Impressing them was a colonial obsession. Tugging a forelock is today dismissed as antiquated and un-Australian, and rightly so. But in the 19th century, the zeitgeist was fawning deference to all things British. On that first English tour in 1861, the visitors played 12 matches, including a game against the Victorian team that drew a staggering 45,000 spectators. The English were impressed by the quality of the cricket and their warm welcome, so they returned for a second Aussie tour the next year. Tours made good money. In 1868, an all-Aboriginal team were the first Aussie cricketers to tour England, and they played 47 games in England. They won 14, lost 14, and the rest were draws, which is quite impressive. In 1878, the first official Australian team travelled to England, where they played a game so legendary it is regarded as giving birth to the modern era of the game. Australia had a smashing victory at the sacred home of the game, Lord's Cricket Ground. The English crowd were shocked by the loss, but simultaneously they cheered on the success of their colonial cousins. The captain of the Australian team was New South Welshman Dave Gregory, and the man of the match was Fred Spofforth, 2 names who will feature again in this episode. Later in the same year, the English cricket team toured Australia again, led by Lord Harris. It was England's 5th Australian tour. In December 1878, the Australian newspapers welcomed the visitors as the gentlemen of England. And they were gentlemen. The team were mostly upper-class toffs with pedigrees from institutions like Eton, Harrow and Oxford. Lord Harris, the captain, would later serve as the British governor of Bombay, which is one of the most senior positions in the entire empire. Their first match of the English tour was against the South Australian team in Adelaide. England won, and then the visitors sailed in a steamship to Victoria. On the 17th of December 1878, the Argus newspaper reported the arrival of the English team in Melbourne.
A considerable crowd had collected in front of the Melbourne Town Hall sometime before the arrival of the 11, and on the appearance of the party, the visitors were greeted with hearty cheers. Lord Harris, on behalf of the team, in a few suitable words expressed their grateful appreciation of the kind welcome which had been accorded them. Champagne was then produced, and after the usual loyal toasts, the Mayor proposed a toast to
our guests, the gentlemen cricketers of England.
The toast was drunk with great cheering and was briefly responded to by Lord Harris. The Honourable J.G. Francis proposed the toast of the visitors and hoped that during their stay in the colonies they would feel at home, as Englishmen in an English community. Lord Harris, in responding, again expressed the thanks of the team for the warm welcome they had received, which he said had even surpassed the expectations they had formed from their knowledge of the proverbial hospitality of the colonies.
A week later, on Christmas Day, 1878, the same newspaper reported,
the cricket match to be begun tomorrow on the ground of the MCG between Lord Harris's English team and 15 Victorian players is exciting a great deal of interest, and preparations have been made for a large attendance of the public. 7 new gates with a corresponding number of ticket boxes have been put up so that there is not likely to be any disagreeable crushing. In the grandstand, a box has been railed in for the English gentlemen players and their lady friends, and the vice-regal box has also been set in order, His Excellency the Governor having promised his attendance.
The England vs Victoria match was an exciting game, played in goodwill, but as is often the case with Test cricket, the game did end in a draw. The tourists' next game in Melbourne was the first of 2 matches against the All-Australian team. When the Aussies arrived at the Spencer Street train station, the Argus on the 11th of December 1878 captured the public mood.
Collins Street from Town Hall westward was gay with flags, and in the middle of the block a line of banners was stretched across the roadway. The Spencer Street platform was filled with a large body of spectators, and the approaches to the station almost completely blocked. The utmost anxiety was shown by all parties to obtain a glimpse of the 11, and a push was made for all the best places, for the approaches to the platform, the tops of lampposts, the summits of veranda columns, the roofs of omnibuses, and so on.
3 days before the first big international match of the series, a letter to the Argus from one who described him or herself as a lover of cricket wrote,
"Sir, may I suggest that the government proclaim Thursday next as a half-day holiday? Otherwise, thousands of persons will not have a chance of witnessing one of the most interesting contests that will ever take place upon the Melbourne cricket ground."
This match is officially recognised as the 3rd test in the history of cricket, and Australia convincingly won. Across the continent, the pride and the jubilation of the Colonials knew no bound. The man of the match was, like at Lord's a few months earlier, the New South Wales fast bowler, Fred Spofforth, aka the Demon, who took 13 of the 20 English wickets, including a hat-trick. The second game against the Australian team was to be played in Sydney, so the English sailed from Melbourne to Sydney. Before that second international, however, the English would first play the New South Wales team twice. Well, that was the intention, but as we'll soon see, Sydney would only host 2 games. In the first England vs New South Wales match, the Demon was ruled out due to injury. Yet despite that setback, the large crowd still watched New South Wales win. On the conclusion of the game, the Sydney Morning Herald on the 30th of January 1879 wrote,
"The visit of an English cricket team to the colonies, although it has now become an ordinary event, is always anticipated with much gratification, but we doubt whether any team has been welcomed with more cordiality than that given to the corps led by Lord Harris. It may be mentioned that when it became known, just before the commencement of the game, that Mr. Spofforth, i.e. the Demon, owing to a sprained wrist, was unable to take part in the match anticipations, were strongly in favour of a victory for the British team. The result, however, was different, although the match was so well contested that old lovers of the game confessed that no better cricket had ever been played in Sydney."
So, everything is fine so far, but now we come to the second England vs New South Wales match. Before play started, the locals were clear favourites. England had just been defeated by the same team on the same ground, and now to make things worse for England, the Demon was back from injury. The match began on Friday, the 7th of February 1879. In this era of cricket, the practice was that each team would appoint whoever they wanted as one of the two umpires. The English had appointed as their umpire a 22-year-old Victorian, George Coulthard. A Victorian in the pay of the English was a bad look for the Sydney crowd, but Coulthard was no boring umpire. He was a sporting freak. Despite his youth, Coulthard was already the greatest Aussie rules player of the era and would be the first inductee into that code's Hall of Fame. He was also a champion boxer and would later represent Australia in Test cricket. Just for fun, Coulthard had come to Sydney a couple of years earlier and played 2 rugby games. In the second of those rugby games, he scored all 5 goals and 4 tries. It was said,
Coulthard had showed rugby men how their game should be played.
After demonstrating with ease his athletic superiority, Coulthard trotted back to Melbourne. Later that same year, however, he returned to Sydney after being lured by promises he'd make Aussie rules reign in Sydney. But that didn't work out, and after a falling out with the promoters, he returned to Melbourne. So yes, this Victorian Coulthard was well known by the Sydney crowd. He was now umpiring before. He was also disliked and distrusted. The New South Wales team picked Edmund Barton as their umpire. Barton had been born in Glebe in Sydney in 1849. His dad was an English-born stockbroker who had gone bankrupt. Financial mismanagement would prove to be hereditary. Barton was naturally gifted. He won a scholarship to Sydney Grammar where he was Dachshund captain in both 1863 and 1864. He then studied classics at the University of Sydney, and since then he'd worked but not excelled as a barrister. But Barton loved cricket. He was no more than average with the bat and worse in the field, but he was a dedicated administrator. When there was the after-match drinks, Barton was usually centre stage. So the game began, and to everyone's surprise, after the first day of play, England was on top. The visitors had scored a respectable 267 runs, while New South Wales had lost 2 wickets for 53. The Sydney Morning Herald reported in the following morning's paper.
The return match between Lord Harris's team and the 11 of New South Wales was commenced yesterday and gives every promise of furnishing as much excitement as the previous contest, but the remarkable stand made by Hornby and Lucas, i.e. the English batsmen, against such bowlers as Spafforth, Evans and Tyndall took everyone by surprise. The scoring from the start was unusually rapid, and the manner in which both batsmen knocked the demon about astonished those who considered our crack bowler infallible. Luck, apart from bad fielding, was once more against the local team, and the decision of Mr. Coulthard, which gave Lord Harris not out for a catch by the wicket-keeper, was admittedly a mistake. Umpires, however, are not infallible, and it would be unfair to say that Mr. Coulthard was guilty of anything beyond an error of judgment. With a formidable total against them, the prospect looked anything but bright for New South Wales, but our team have commenced very fairly, and with Murdoch and Massey to resume the companionship today, the contest is far from one-sided. There were 2 matters yesterday which gave rise to considerable comment. The first was the impunity with which open betting was carried on in the pavilion. The printed placards notifying that betting was strictly prohibited was ignored with an assurance characteristic of certain of the sporting fraternity who make gambling a trade. The other matter to which it is desirable to call attention is the practice of smoking on that portion of the grandstand lawn, which is specifically set apart for the convenience of ladies.
A large crowd came to watch the second day's play. The agitated bookmakers were heavily invested in a New South Wales win, but as the day progressed, those bets were becoming liabilities. As mentioned, England had scored 267 in their first innings, while New South Wales only reached 177. It's never a good omen to be forced to bat again, and New South Wales now were. By 4 p.m, the English team was coasting to victory. The only New South Wales hope left was its best batsman, Billy Murdoch, who was still at the crease. But then umpire Coulthard declared Murdoch was run out. With Murdoch out, the match was effectively over and England had won. But was he out? The crowd said he wasn't, and let rip with a chant, "Not out, go back! Not out, go back!" Now, in light of the dubious decision of umpire Coulthard on the first day's play, which had also favoured England, the angry crowd was certain. There was a diabolical plot between the English team and that bloody Victorian umpire. For those not familiar with cricket, what is happening at this moment is that there are 11 English players on the field, the entire team, and there are 2 New South Wales batsmen out there as well. One has been dismissed by the umpire, and so he needs to walk off the ground and be replaced by another local batsman. The New South Wales captain, Dave Gregory, fatefully sided with the crowd, which had morphed into a big, baying, angry mob. Gregory refused to send out the next batsman. Yes, he would accept the decision that Murdoch was out, but he demanded the game be paused until the English captain agreed to immediately dismiss his appointed umpire for incompetence and or bias. The English captain, Lord Harris, refused that demand. There was a tense standoff under the hot February sun. It was a Saturday, and so the booze was flowing. In the pavilion, bookmakers were stoking the anger of the 10,000-strong crowd, perhaps hoping that if the game was called off due to unrest, they might get their losing bets cancelled. The two captains continued their snippy exchange in the full glare of all, and at that point, Kero was thrown on the fire. Word swept the ground that two English fielders had muttered,
"What can you expect from the sons of convicts?"
Today, convict ancestry is prized, but in 1879 it was painfully shameful, and so all hell then broke loose, as described by the Sydney Morning Herald.
This match was continued on Saturday, and we regret to say was marked by the most disgraceful scene we ever remember to have witnessed on any cricket ground in the metropolis. Such a display of unbridled rowdyism, perpetrated as it was in the presence of His Excellency the Governor, Lady Robinson and party, and a large number of the prominent citizens of Sydney, and directed against the English players, who are at present our guest, will probably remain a blight on the colony for some years to come. The unfortunate occurrence originated in the decision of the English umpire, who, in the second innings of the New South Wales team, decided, on appeal, that Murdoch was run out. The moment the decision was given, the disturbance commenced, and it is a significant fact that the hooting and groaning proceeded first of all from about a dozen persons in the pavilion, some of whom, at all events, were known to be pecuniarily interested in the result of the match. One well-known betting man himself acted as fugleman, and the crowd outside, encouraged by this bad example, worked themselves into a state of violent excitement and presently broke through all bounds of decency and fair play. All round the enclosure, hundreds of people demanded the withdrawal of Coulthard, and before the vacancy created by Murdoch's retirement was filled, a large number of larrikins sitting at the bottom of the terrace and within the boundary fence made a rush for the centre of the ground and were quickly followed by hundreds of roughs who took possession of the wickets. The English team soon found themselves in the centre of a surging, gesticulating and shouting mob. One rowdy struck Lord Harris across the body with a whip or stick. Mr. Hornby, an English player, at once seized the cowardly ruffian and attempted to bring him into the pavilion. As a general melee was now imminent, a number of gentlemen from the pavilion and grandstand, including the trustees of the ground and members of the Cricket Association, hurried to the assistance of the English team, who might otherwise have been seriously maltreated. But as the mob were evidently bent upon rescuing Mr. Hornby's prisoner, a scene of confusion ensued and blows were received and returned. The small body of police who were present were too late to get to the centre of the ground when the rush occurred, and subsequently found it difficult to make their way through the crowd. However, by dint of determination and to little physical exertion, the English team were escorted into the pavilion, and Lord Harris's assailant was locked up in one of the committee rooms, being released afterward on giving his name and address. Several of the English team received a few scratches, and Mr. Hornby's clothing was somewhat torn, but beyond this, as far as our reporter could ascertain, no serious injury was inflicted, and the umpire, about whose safety some doubts were entertained, came off scratchless, owing mainly to Mr. Hornby's prompt assistance. It appears that either before or after Lord Harris was assaulted, one of the English professionals made use of a grossly insulting remark to the crowd about there being nothing but sons of convicts, and this, no doubt, had something to do with the frenzied excitement which arose all at once and incited the crowd to acts of violence. As there were 2,000 or 3,000 people on the cricket area and in front of the pavilion, the bell rang for clearing the ground, but it was some time before the excitement subsided and an opportunity was afforded to resume play. Thompson and Bannerman and the English 11 went into the field, but as soon as the crowd saw that Coulthard had not been withdrawn, strong expressions of disapproval were heard, and the ground was again rushed. Expostulation by Mr. Driver and other gentlemen appeared to have no effect, and another adjournment to the pavilion took place. Lord Harris and Mr. Gregory subsequently discussed the question of having another umpire, but the majority of the English 11 decided, naturally enough, to stand by their umpire, and the ground having in the meantime been once more cleared, the players proceeded to the wickets for the second time. But as the more disorderly portion of the spectators were determined not to allow the match to go on with Coulthard, about 300 men and larrikins repeated the performance of taking possession of the ground and remained there until nearly 6 o'clock, when all hope of resuming play was abandoned. There were about 10,000 spectators present during the afternoon, and it is only fair to say that of this number there were not more than 2,000 at the outside who took an active part of the disorder. A large majority of the public were evidently deeply humiliated by the occurrence, especially after the cordial reception of the Australian team at home, and much indignation was expressed that the scene should have originated through the ungentlemanly conduct of a few persons in the pavilion.
With play of the day called off, Coulthard was surrounded outside the ground by a threatening mob of around 200, but rescued by some passing sailors. The deliberations continued the following day, a Sunday, and the English agreed that play would resume on Monday on the condition that Coulthard remain as umpire. By now, the ashamed New South Wales captain had agreed to those terms, and when play did resume, England crushed a dispirited New South Wales. The scoreboard was, however, a mere footnote. To have said it's just not cricket is an obvious understatement. Across Australia, the press and the public were united in their horror at the mob, which incidentally included a teenage relative of Barton, Banjo Patterson. Proud Australians wanted the world to stop thinking they lived in a far-flung jail, and so were aghast the drunken louts of the Sydney riot of 1879 had done untold reputational damage. The scheduled second international match in Sydney was cancelled, and the English team abruptly departed Sydney and returned to the friendliness of marvellous Melbourne. The New South Wales Cricket Association issued a fulsome public apology to the English expressing
profound sorrow and regret for the conduct of the unruly portion of the crowd.
Then Sydney's Evening News on the 11th of February reported on the reaction in a coastal town of Grafton.
The intelligence received here on Saturday that an attack by a mob had been made on the English cricketers has been received by the public, and especially by the native born of the colony, with marked symptoms of disapprobation, and many think it is a disgrace to the whole colony. It is suggested that the Mayor should call a public meeting for the purpose of sympathising with Lord Harris and his team.
The Weekly Sydney Punch wrote on the 15th of February,
all lovers of fair play, as Englishmen are said to be, had their sense of propriety ruthlessly shocked by the display of unmitigated ruffianism which took place at the Association Cricket Ground on Saturday last.
And then the Melbourne-based Weekly, the Australasian, couldn't resist a serious jab at their colonial rival, and on the 15th of February wrote,
the exhibition of rowdyism that occurred on the cricket ground at Sydney last Saturday is a disgrace to Australian cricket. Some recollection of the grand reception the Australian 11 received in the old country, one would imagine, would have restrained the colonial mob from so violent an exhibition of partisanship in the presence of the gentlemen of England. But no, New South Wales can produce good cricketers, but the lower class of the populace of Sydney has unfortunately acquired a notoriety for exhibitions of partiality and unfairness. At the first intercolonial cricket match ever played at Sydney, a riot was nearly occurring over a precisely similar occurrence, a run-out, and was only prevented by the Melbourne captain giving way and allowing the batsman to go in a second time. It is some consolation to Victorian cricketers that they can look back for 5 and 20 years with the reflection that a similar scene to that, which took place at Sydney, has never happened on a Victorian cricket ground.
In the days immediately after, there were no media reports that mentioned the role of the New South Wales umpire, Edmund Barton, but a public dispute soon unfolded over whether the English players truly did mutter that Aussies are the sons of convicts. The two accused English players wrote in the Sydney Morning Herald and denied it, but the Sydney Morning Herald's cricket correspondent responded in turn and affirmed that they did. In his first public act, Barton waded into this controversy with his own letter to the Sydney Morning Herald, and Barton sided firmly with the English team. He wrote to set the record straight.
Sir, with the desire of removing any misapprehension which may exist concerning the conduct of affairs in the recent match, allow me to state the following facts. I am not aware that any concession of any nature whatsoever was made except by Lord Harris, who on one occasion at least might have claimed the match on appeal to me as umpire. But for his forbearance, under peculiarly aggressive circumstances, the action of the mob on Saturday would have brought the match to a sudden end and given the victory to Lord Harris's team without further trouble. I saw no trace of unfairness in the decision given by Coulthard, and I cannot see how the visiting 11 could have taken any other course than that which they did take. It has been said and printed that one of the two English professionals uttered grossly insulting expressions to the crowd when the riot was in progress. Both of them have publicly denied the truth of the charge. I desire to add that from what I have seen of both of them, I believe them to be honest and incapable of having acted or spoken in such a way as to lay themselves open to any accusation whatever. And I close this letter by saying that their denial ought certainly to be believed. Yours faithfully, Edmund Barton, February 11th.
I stumbled upon this letter to the editor a few years ago, and I'm fairly sure it's Barton's first appearance in public life. My hunch is that the English players were guilty of muttering the slur. These things don't appear out of thin air. And it's also my hunch that umpire Coulthard was biased and unfairly gave Murdoch out. But in the absence of video replay, Barton went on the record to declare the English to be correct on both counts. According to Barton, the New South Wales umpire no less, Murdoch was out and no English players used the convict sledge. Barton's intervention was in line with the spirit of gentlemanly cricket, and the astute politician-to-be was clearly in line with public opinion. Barton's letter to the Sydney Morning Herald seems to have ended this squabble about the sons of convicts, and on the backswing, Barton endeared himself to the English, who would soon handsomely repay him. In the days after the match, Lord Harris, the English captain, had written a scathing letter to a friend in England which details his version of the riot. The letter was clearly intended to find its way into the British press, which, surprise, surprise, it did on the 31st of March, about 7 weeks after the riot, when it was published in full in London's prestigious Daily Telegraph. The letter was long and cast a bad light on Australia in general. Barton, however, gets a special mention in Lord Harris's account, which would be political gold for him. In part, Lord Harris wrote,
"For some 30 minutes or so, I was surrounded on the field by a howling mob, resisting the entreaties of partisans and friends to return to the pavilion until the field was cleared, on the grounds that if our side left the field, the other team could claim the match. At about 5 o'clock, the crowd was cleared off somehow. I then took the opinion of the English players as to changing the umpire, and it was decided that there were no grounds for the objection, and that we should decline to change him. I informed Gregory, the NSW captain, of the decision, whereupon he said, 'Then the game is at end.' I turned to Mr. Barton and asked if I could not claim the match according to the laws of cricket. His answer was, 'I shall give it you in 2 minutes' time if the batsmen do not return.' I said to Mr. Barton, 'I won't claim it yet. I'll give the other side every chance of reconsidering a decision arrived at, I believe, unadvisedly and in a moment of passion. Please ask Gregory what he means to do.' On returning, Mr. Barton informed me that Gregory would send 2 men to the wickets. A curiously sudden change of mind, I think you will allow. They are capital winners out here, but I'm afraid I can't apply the same adjective to them as losers. To conclude, I cannot describe to you the horror we felt that such an insult should have been passed on us, and that the game we love so well and wish to see honoured, supported, and played in an honest and manly way everywhere should receive such desecration. I can use no milder word. We never expect to see such a scene of disorder again. We can never forget this one."
Lord Harris's letter was widely reprinted in Australian newspapers. The colonial fear that their reputation might be sullied in England because of a few drunken yobbos was now a reality crashing down on them. But the one noble Aussie in this dark hour was umpire Barton. In the heat of the moment, Barton's path of least resistance would have been to side with the mob. Many in his position would have done so simply out of fear of violence. Despite being paid by the New South Wales team and undoubtedly friends with many of them, Barton was resolute. He stared down the mob, the punters, and his mates. The batsman was out, and the mob must be defied. His demand to the belligerent New South Wales captain that play resume within 2 minutes or England would be declared the winner was the act of a statesman. We don't know what Barton said to the New South Wales captain, but whatever he said, the captain did buckle. Now, of course, it's possible Barton's role was embellished by the English captain and he was just returning a favour, but Lord Harris's description of Barton's actions does sound like Barton. Regardless, perception is a big part of politics, so when newspapers across England and Australia described Barton as a wise, fair-minded and courageous statesman, well, that's what he was. As you'll see when we get to the Federation era, I'm not much of a Barton fan, but seriously, is there any better way to become an instant public figure in Australia than this day at the cricket with Edmund Barton? And best of all, it wasn't Barton singing his own praise, it was Lord Harris. Barton had run for Parliament previously, but he didn't come close. His critics said he was too young and too unknown, but within months, he'd have another crack, and this time, he'll waltz in. In the background of the cricket scandal was Barton's future rival for both the Premiership of New South Wales and the Prime Ministership of Australia, George Reid. Barton and Reid had hung out as teenagers fishing in Sydney Harbour. It's possible their dramatic political rivalry began in the wake of the cricket riot. Parochial George Reid was in the crowd that fateful day, and characteristically, Reid was on the side of the people. Barton, characteristically, was on the side of the establishment. Soon after Lord Harris's letter was published across Australia, Reid addressed a special general meeting of the New South Wales Cricket Association held on June 4, 1879 at the Tattersalls Hotel in Sydney. That meeting unanimously resolved to challenge Harris's account as inaccurate and ungenerous. Reid was undermining the Lord Harris letter that had glorified Barton. Now, Barton was still the big winner out of all this, but surely Barton resented Reid's attempt to raid on his parade. They would engage in tit-for-tat retaliation for years to come. So that's it for the introductory sample episode. Please now tune into the first official episode that sees the political history of Australia begin with a joint venture between an Egyptian pharaoh and some Phoenician sailors.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Political History of Australia podcast with your host, John Ruddick. Click follow to receive episode notifications, and leaving a review helps others find the podcast.